well, in the last episode here at the Gettysburg Museum of History, we were looking at some of the parachute rigs from the members of the 101st Airborne on D-Day. In this episode, we're going to get really granular here and start looking at some of the specialty items of the airborne troopers in World War II.
Show you some World War II U.S. airborne specialty equipment. Now, World War II was the first time airborne warfare was used, and so it was in development, and they kind of were testing things, and they were kind of making things up as they went. Certain things worked, other things didn't. They improved on things, they discontinued certain things, but here's a few interesting items. This is what we call a letdown rope, and this is just a regular piece of rope. Now, this was recovered in Normandy. The ends have these little ties on them, and this piece of equipment was used by airborne troops. Each one was issued one, and the idea was if they would get hung up in a tree, they would be able to sling that rope around a branch and let themselves down, letdown rope, without breaking their leg. In Normandy there was a lot of hedgerows and they were used primarily there. They used them in Holland as well, but that's an interesting piece of airborne equipment, and the Norman farmers pick them up as well. You find them sometimes over there. And here are leather gloves. These are not specifically airborne, but they were used by a lot of times by airborne troops. I think they were used by some other troops too. And this has a soldier's laundry stamp on there. That's the last 4 digits of his serial number and the letter N, which is the first letter in his last name. And so these were worn by paratroopers when they would jump to enhance their ability to control their descent. So you would have, we did another video on the parachutes, that you would have risers that would attach to the ropes, and the way you would control your movement was you would pull on one side to make you go to the one way or another. So you would have to be able to really pull on that and get a good grip, and sometimes you would get rope burns from it. So a lot of them wore these nice thick leather gloves. Another piece of airborne equipment that was designed for paratroopers is the Switchblade Knife, or self-opening knife. It was kept in a pocket in their jump jacket that would be near their neck. And they would put a lanyard on around their neck, and the idea was if they were hung up in a tree, they could open it up with one hand, just by pressing that button, and they could grab a riser or their ropes and cut those ropes and be able to get out of a tree. And these were usually razor sharp. They would sharpen them so they would cut through anything very quickly, and specifically designed for airborne troops. And this one still works. This one was carried by a paratrooper in the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne, named Stanley Medeye, and we have his uniform as well. Here is a German version of the same idea that was actually captured by an American soldier named Richard Hoover, who was in C Company 506, and he carved a Screaming Eagle and a US on there. And the German single-handed knife worked a different way. The American ones had the button. The German one, you would go like this, and it was like a gravity knife, and then lock the blade into place like that, and then you could shut it the same way. And that's pretty interesting that an American soldier picked that up and put a Screaming Eagle on there. Very interesting piece. One of the legendary pieces of airborne equipment, specifically used by the 101st Airborne, was the signal cricket. And these were only used on D-Day. and it was a signaling device. And actually, these were used with bands for timing, like 1, 2, 3, and they would click it. And it was made by the Acme Corporation Acme Company in England, and they bought a whole bunch of these right before D-Day, and the idea was to use it as a signal. So if you would encounter another person in the dead of night during D-Day, you would click once, and then the person was supposed to respond by clicking twice. If you didn't get that 2 clicks back, they were assumed to be an enemy soldier, and you would open fire. The first round of these that were bought for the 101st Airborne, and this was a last minute idea. This wasn't specifically made for them. They went and bought these from Acme, and they didn't have enough. And so the first 1,000 or 2,000 maybe were chrome like this, or nickel plated, I guess it would be. And they rushed into production, several thousand more. So you also see some that are made out of just brass, and the ones that are just brass do not have the name Acme stamped on it. They wanted to rush them, and so probably 90% of them are going to be just brass. And they're extremely rare. They make really good replicas of these, so it's really hard to tell. There is a way to tell with the lettering and a certain couple other little things that you look for. But this one was carried by a 502nd soldier named C.B. Williams. It's named. So he was in the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne. So again, that's the legendary cricket. Now, they did not look like frogs like the ones in The Longest Day. You know, if you watch The Longest Day with John Wayne, you know, he holds one up and it looks like a frog, or like like a child's toy, and that's not what they really looked like. And also the 82nd Airborne, who John Wayne was portraying a soldier from, did not use crickets. They used verbal passwords. So they were only issued to the 101st Airborne, despite what some of the rumors say. But there's a really good book about it called The DDay Cricket by Michel Detrez, and it has all the information in there.
All right, so I don't know if it's possible for a grown man to have a World War II cricket right in front of him and not just click it a few times. Very cool.
I want to show you this. This isn't really a specialty equipment, but this is a modified M1 Garand bayonet. And a trooper named Mulholland, who was in the 82nd Airborne, fashioned a set of, I guess you'd call them iron knuckles, because they're not really brass, but brass knuckles onto an M1 Garand bayonet, and then he used friction tape to modify a scabbard. And friction tape was used a lot by soldiers in World War II, especially airborne troops. And Mulholland was actually a parachute rigger. So those guys would modify equipment and modify parachutes. And they were also the ones that put the reinforcements on uniforms, which we will do a video about that at some point. But it's really interesting. It's eventually we want to do a video on fighting knives. There were so many different variations on them, and we have a bunch of them in our collection. But I just want to point out a couple of interesting, very specific pieces of airborne World War II equipment.
Alright, so those are just a few of the airborne specialty items from World War II. Some things that you may have never even considered or knew existed. So anyway, if you go to Erik's website at the Gettysburg Museum of History.com, there are tons of pictures and articles and things like that where you can learn more about these historic items. There's also a store page where you can get some of these artifacts for yourself. So yeah, very, very interesting.